Have you ever tried to freeze-dry honey at home? If you have, then you already know that the results are generally the same. Pretty disastrous. That is until today, because for the first time on YouTube, we have officially cracked the code on how to freeze-dry honey. Absolutely gorgeous freeze-dried honey powder. And in today's video, I'm going to take you through the entire process so that you can have the exact same results if you want to do this at home. Some might ask, why would you want to freeze-dry honey? In this jar, we have 2 cups of freeze-dried honey powder. It took a 1/3 cup of honey liquid in order to make this. So the freeze-dried version is definitely not space-saving. It's not going to make the honey last any longer because honey already has pretty much an indefinite shelf life. It doesn't require refrigeration. The reason I wanted to freeze-dry honey, partially, if I had to be completely honest, is because I've always thought that honey could be freeze-dried. I mean, it's basically made up of different types of sugars, and things with a lot of sugar can definitely be freeze-dried. The other reason I wanted to freeze-dry honey is because I like the idea of having a honey powder. You could sprinkle it on desserts as a finishing sugar, even on salads, or maybe you want to add it to a recipe to give it a honey-forward flavor without adding additional liquid. Honey powder is absolutely perfect for that. All right, are you ready to see how we freeze-dried honey? Let's do it. Okay, let's talk about the tray. For today's freeze-dried honey, we're going to be using the Blue Alpine freeze dryer, and on their large freeze dryer, they use a half sheet pan. Every brand out there has different pan sizes and often different rack sizes, so check the description box below for an idea of how much of the honey solution you need to add to your tray depending on the brand that you have. If you overfill your tray, you will have a honey disaster. Not a good idea. So this particular tray can hold 10 cups of water, and I'm only going to fill it about 40%. So that's 4 cups of our honey solution. It should be absolutely perfect. I am going to be using the 4-rack system for the Blue Alpine. If you are using the 5-rack system, so you have 5 shelves in there, you're just going to add a little bit less, primarily because there's not as much clearance between the shelves on the 5-tray system like there is on the 4-tray system. Okay, another very important thing is how you freeze your liquid. It needs to be frozen completely level and perfectly flat. If you put it in your freezer and it has a bit of a tilt to it, right? And so let's say, your water kind of pulls to the right or something like that, and you have more honey solution on the right, then that's going to overexpand and cause a mess as well. So you do want to make sure, and this is very important, you want to make sure that when you freeze it, it freezes perfectly level and perfectly flat. And for me, the easiest way to do that is just to freeze these trays inside the Blue Alpine freeze jar, which I'll show you how to do here in a second. The last thing is this silicone mat. Under normal circumstances, I like it. It makes cleanup super easy, but for this particular project, we are not going to use it. Matter of fact, I wouldn't even suggest using parchment paper or anything like that. Just pour your honey water solution directly onto your tray, and you'll see why at the end of this video. Okay, now let's go over to the freeze dryer, and I'm going to put the 4-tray shelf system right into that chamber. And notice we have a little fan right here in the back. Love this feature. This comes on both the large and the medium Blue Alpine freeze dryer. And let me tell you why. Under normal circumstances, freeze dryers are not very efficient freezers. They're great dryers, not very good freezers. But when you add fans, that fan starts to circulate that air around, and it, in essence, turns your freeze dryer into something like a blast chiller, which freezes the food a lot quicker. Now, don't get me wrong. It's still going to take a little bit of time, but it is certainly a lot faster than not having a fan. So there you go. I'm just going to plug that in, slide it into the chamber, and replace the seal ring, and we are back in business. All right, so far so good. It's time to power on the freeze dryer so that we can take a look at the menu. This is the home screen for the Blue Alpine. And if you press Quick Start, that's going to automatically bump you into whatever the default settings are for the Quick Start. Quick Start works for most things. If you're freeze drying food and whatever, you can just press Quick Start and you are in business. I'm going to show you what those settings are, and this is what the default Quick Start settings look like. 9 hours of freeze time. The default dry time is 24 hours. Okay. The default dry temperature, that's the max temperature, is set to 118, and the default set pressure is set to 900 mTorr. Now, if I wanted, I could change all these defaults so that it matches what I'm trying to do, but we're not going to do that. We're going to go back to the home screen, and in this case, I'm going to click on the recipes option. Now, when you click the recipes, you'll see a lot of presets for things that you might be doing. We're going to click the liquid button here, and notice the default for the liquid is 9 hours of freeze time, 24 hours
of dry time. The dry temperature is also 118 Fahrenheit, and the dry pressure is 1095 mTorr. Now this is close, but I am going to make a few adjustments and I'm going to explain what I'm going to do. So to change the default presets, we're going to click Edit in the top right hand corner. We're going to edit the liquid, and right here we're going to change the presets for liquid. The liquid freeze time is 9 hours, which I think is going to be more than plenty. The liquid dry time is set to 24 hours. Now we may be done in 24 hours, but I'm just going to increase that to 36 just to be on the safe side. We're going to increase the dry temp to 145, so we're freeze drying a little bit hotter than normal. And the pressure, we're going to reduce that to, honestly, anything between 500 and 600. I'm going to probably keep it at 607, but if you want to bring it a little bit lower, that's fine. Or if you have a machine where you can't adjust it, then I wouldn't even worry about it. If you try to go below 600, you will get this warning screen, just making sure you know what you're doing. And if you hit continue, this will allow you to bring the mTorr even lower. And to just quickly explain the mTorr target, if you have a low mTorr, then your freeze drying cycle is going to take longer. If you have a higher mTorr, then your freeze drying cycle is going to happen a lot faster. And so, maybe we can cover the details of that in a later video, but there we have it. Now, it is important to know that at any given moment, you can press reset on this and it will restore back to factory default, so you don't have to remember what was there originally. So here's our settings: 9 hours of freezing, 36 hours of drying, and that's probably going to be way too much, but that's okay. The drying temperature is 145, and then the pressure, the mTorr, is 607. If you have a freeze dryer where you can make these adjustments, this is what you want your freeze dryer to be reading. Let's go ahead and go back, save and exit. And now when we click the liquid button, it will reflect the changes that we made, and there it is. Absolutely perfect. At this point, all we got to do is click continue, and our freeze dryer will begin the first step, which is the freezing process. All right, there we go. We got a 9-hour countdown happening. And at this stage, we're going to load up our trays. Basically, I'm pre-freezing the tray only. Here in a little while, once we prepare our solution, we're just going to pour that into the pre-frozen trays while it's in the freeze dryer. Notice we've got some beautiful ice rings already started to form. We're going to put our empty trays on each one of those shelves. And there it is. Okay, so this is going to get super cold. I'm talking negative 28, negative 30 degrees. It's going to be absolutely beautiful. And now we need to make our honey solution. So here's where things get a little interesting. We're going to start off with 8 cups of water, and the ratio of honey to water is 1 to 16. I found that this ratio gave me the most consistent results, and what that basically means is just half a cup of honey to 8 cups of water. The next thing that we need is bubbles. I found the more bubbles, the more air that was incorporated into this mixture, the better. And so we're going to be blending this in our blender. You can also use a stick blender. That would work fine. So into the blender, we're going to add water and honey. And I learned, at least when we made really small batches, and maybe that was a problem, I should probably test a larger batch. But anyway, I observed that when we did small batches, and I'm talking 1 tablespoon of honey to a cup of water, the honey water mixture alone wasn't cutting it. So I thought, let's add a thickener and change the viscosity of that mixture. And that's what we're adding right here. This ingredient is called Xanthan Gum. I'll put a link in the description box if you need some. And we're not adding a lot. Basically 1 teaspoon is all we've added. And this little bit's going to help thicken up our liquid. When you add Xanthan Gum to basically any liquid, you're going to need to blend it. You can't whisk it. If you try to whisk it, it'll clump up. So using our blender, or you could use a stick blender, make sure that you blend it in really good. And remember, we want lots of bubbles, so we're going to start on low and then crank it all the way on high. And I'm going to let this run for 3 to 5 minutes. I just want so many bubbles inside this mixture, and it looks like we are there. Absolutely beautiful. Now, you can't see the consistency of the mixture through the bubbles, but it is a little bit thicker. Let's head over to the freeze dryer where our trays have been pre-freezing, and we're just going to put, like I said earlier, 40% liquid into each one of those trays, which equates out to 4 cups. If you're using the Blue Alpine 5-tray system, you're only going to put 30% liquid. So in your case, if you have the large, you're going to put 3 cups per tray. And if you have the medium, you're only going to put 1.5 cups per tray. But I'll put all that information in the description box below, as well as other brands if you happen to have another brand. So let's go ahead and finish filling those up. Look at the consistency of that honey water mixture. Definitely a little bit thicker than what it would normally be, and that's absolutely perfect. Close the door, lock it down, and let the program do its thing. The freezing cycle is now behind us, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through each one of these stages so that if you have any questions, hopefully I'll answer them in these little segments. But the drying cycle is now beginning. The 36-hour timer that we originally put for drying is now counting backwards, and we're 15 minutes into it. Our max shelf temperature is 145. That's going to be the final temperature. And if you notice right down here in the bottom, it says that our current shelf temperature is at -10 degrees. Through this process, that number is going to slowly increase, that temperature is going to slowly rise, and the liquid that we added is going to sublimate, leaving us with only honey. 17 hours have now passed, and let's look at the machine once again. Notice right there at the bottom, 17 hours and 38 minutes into the drying cycle. We have 18 hours and 21 minutes left because we set a 36-hour timer. Our temperature on our shelf is almost at 100 degrees. Notice right there it says 97.5, and right now is when things are just starting to get good. The moisture is being sublimated. The honey is now starting to expand, and you can see it a little bit better right here. None of it is touching the shelf above it, which is exactly what we want. And don't open or close or stop the process at this point. If you do, the entire structure will collapse and will turn back into kind of a really sticky, gooey mess in your tray. You want to let it continue freeze drying. We're going to get a little more rise out of that honey, but not enough to get it all over the shelf above it, which is why we only added 40% liquid to these trays. And like I said earlier, if you add too much liquid, then you are going to get a bigger rise, which is just going to be a mess to clean up. All right, so at this point, we're going to let it continue. Remember, our shelf temperature target is 145 degrees, and roughly 2 hours later, or 3 hours later, we've now hit that target. So the machine is now at 145 Fahrenheit, and we've been freeze drying for 20 hours. And this is where we make a transition. We're going to go from sublimating the moisture, which is what happened in the beginning, to now treating this honey like candy, which is why we're finishing at such a high temperature. At that 145, the freeze dryer is going to help crystallize that honey, and that's what's going to give us our honey powder. 2.5 hours have passed. We've been at 145 Fahrenheit for that amount of time. And when you get to your final temperature, you want to let your freeze dryer hang at that 145 for at least 2 to 3 hours. If you go longer, that's totally fine. You just don't want to go shorter, 2 to 3 hours minimum. Out of the 36 hours that we programmed for this cycle, we have 13 hours left. And I figured we would get finished sooner, but every freeze dryer is different, so just be sure to give yourself plenty of time. The last thing we need to do before we pull our honey out is cool the trays. And we want to do this while the unit is under vacuum. Now, one of the cool features of the Blue Alpine, and it makes this incredibly easy, is that you can adjust the shelf temperature mid-cycle. And what we want to do is we want to lower the shelf temperature to about 75 Fahrenheit. This is going to cool the honey while it's under vacuum, allowing it to retain that expanded form. And that's really what you want. If you pull it too soon, it's going to collapse and you're not going to get the same results. And so I'm going to let it hang in here at this cooler temperature for 1.5 hours to 2 hours. If you let it go longer, that's fine. You just don't want to pull it too soon. If you happen to have another brand freeze dryer where you cannot adjust the temperature, in your case, you're just going to stop the freeze drying cycle. The compressor will still be on, and you're not going to break the vacuum inside the chamber, and let it hang out in there until it cools down. I will admit that that method is slightly trickier because if you let it hang out in there too much, the below freezing environment will have a negative effect on the honey crystal. So you're just going to have to keep an eye on it. All right, we are officially finished. A total of 24 hours have passed, and so we were able to dry everything within the 24-hour period. And the tray has been at 75 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 1.5 hours. Let's go ahead and stop the cycle. So we're going to hit pause, and then we'll stop it later. I'm going to break the vacuum, open it up, and if you listen very carefully, you can hear it crackle if you've done this correctly. All right, so the freeze drying portion of making honey powder is now behind us. Let me show you the final few steps of what you need to do in order to make it successfully. This is perfect, by the way. This is exactly what it should look like at this stage. It's crispy, it's crackly, and I'm just gonna take a spatula and I'm gonna scrape the pan. And this is the reason why we didn't use a silicone mat or a parchment paper in the beginning. This process causes the honey to get incredibly tacky, incredibly sticky, and it will stick to the parchment paper, trust me, I know, and the silicone mat, and it's much more difficult to get off. I found it to be a whole lot easier to just scrape the pan and then put it into a bag. And you don't have to use a vacuum seal bag, you could use a Ziploc bag. And notice that our honey mixture is a little soft. It's not quite powder just yet, but that's okay. You'll see the transformation here in a minute. We're gonna set that to the side while we get the rest scraped. Here's what our honey looks like after it's been scraped from the pans and put into this bag. At this point, I'm just going to give it a quick little seal. It's going to hang in this bag for a few minutes. If you have this in a Ziploc bag, which is totally fine, just close the Ziploc bag. And as this continues to cool down, you're going to notice that the crystals are going to start to firm up and they will become very brittle. So I'm going to let this cool down a little bit longer right here on the counter. And I want to say about 15 minutes have now passed. And if you let it cool down even more, it'll be even easier to turn into powder, but I think you'll get the point. So all we're doing here is just breaking up those clumps. You could use a rolling pin. You could do it with your hand. It's actually very easy to do. And when you do it for a little while, this is what you're going to end up with. You might have some pieces that have to get broken up a little bit finer, but for the most part, you are going to have now your honey powder. And as you can see right here, 1 cup of liquid honey made a whole bunch of powder. Now, I will say that if you just let it sit just like that, because it still is honey, it might form a little brick, just like so. And what I normally do when that happens, all you got to do is give it a little squeeze. So this is another bag that I made using the same process on a different day. I've got a bunch of these little packs just because we did this so many times. All you got to do is squeeze that little bag a few times and it's back into a powder. Now, one thing that you might want to consider doing is putting a little bit of cornstarch or potato starch in with that, and that will help keep it nice and loose and free-flowing, but that's totally your choice. And you can store this in a bag with a moisture absorber, or you could put it in a mason jar. I did vacuum seal this mason jar, and I think it's time to give it a little taste. So let's open it up so that you can see what this freeze-dried honey looks like, and then we'll give it a taste and see how it turned out.
Freeze-dried honey powder, down the hatch. Just melts right on the tongue. Absolutely delicious. Freeze-dried honey powder. Interestingly enough, in the 18-month journey and the hundreds of batches that we did tried to get to this place, we actually uncovered another way to freeze-dry honey and to make honey powder as well. But the other way changed the flavor a little bit. And what I was looking for was something with a pure, natural honey flavor. The other way actually made it a little bit darker, a little bit richer, and brought a little bit more of that caramel element to the honey, which was still delicious, don't get me wrong. It just didn't have that pure honey flavor. Let me know in the comment section below if you'd like to see that other way, and maybe we'll do a quick little video or a short or something like that on how we freeze-dried honey and made honey powder using a completely different method. And oddly enough, it's a lot easier and a lot faster than this method. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any questions on the process that we used today on how to freeze-dry honey. The freeze dryer that we used in today's video to make this amazing freeze-dried honey powder was the Blue Alpine freeze dryer. We have the large. So if you want information on that, I'll put a link to their company in the description box below. If you already have a freeze dryer, so say you have a Stay Fresh or a Harvest Right and you want to make freeze-dried honey powder, check the description box because I'm going to try to put the quantity of honey solution that each tray can handle depending on the model freeze dryer you have. And so I have a Harvest Right Large and a Harvest Right Large Pro. I'll be sure to put the quantity of solution that you can put in each one of those trays. And then I have a Stay Fresh Standard as well as a Stay Fresh Mega, and I'll put the quantity of solution that those can have because the quantity of solution that you put inside each tray makes a huge difference as to whether or not you're gonna have a disaster on your hands. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. Thanks a lot for watching. If you like today's video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are into exciting food experiments, food preservation, freeze drying, if you like making sausage and salami, or maybe you would like to see how it's made, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks a lot for joining us. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. One more time. I love it.